Worlds are colliding in Dungeon Meshi episode 16 as the main cast finally meets Shuro's party as well as Kabru's, who still believe them to be thieves. It's a very character-driven episode, but that doesn't mean that there isn't still some great animation to check out, so let's break it down and compare it to the source material along the way to see what creative changes have been made. And pay extra attention to the choices that are being made to emphasize the contrast between realism and stylization in this episode. This one covers chapters 35 and 36 and was directed by Shimon Dohi with storyboards by Yoshifumi Hagano. And it starts off by following the manga very closely through this sequence as Chilchuk explains what he's learned about the way that the dungeon transforms. Though it's a shame these two panels are removed where the gang compliment Chilchuk like he's a boy genius. Laios awkwardly pokes his cheek and Senshi just comments that he has big ears for some reason. Of course, Laios is the only one who doesn't close his mouth when diving through the Goop Wall, and while this still image is a one-to-one recreation of this panel, they've added this disturbing 11-frame close-up of his face emerging from the wall. It reminds me of this cut from episode 11 by Atsushi Yoneda, and I'm willing to guess that this one is him too, given that this cut, a few seconds later, is confirmed to be his work. There are a few layers composited together to create this bendy wall effect. The cracks between the bricks, along with Laios' face, are drawn on animation cells. Under that, this texture, which represents the larger imperfections in the bricks, isn't hand-drawn, but it does get warped along with the animated parts in 24 frames per second for the first 5 frames, then 12 FPS for the last 6, just like the animation cells. Finally, underneath that, this smaller and more uniform texture of the basic surface of the bricks is completely stationary. It seems like Laios is uniquely privileged with the ability to transform into this highly realistic close-up style where his nose and eyes become real, human, and volumetric instead of simplified indications, and his teeth suddenly become individual teeth instead of just a line. Well, maybe that last part runs in the family. He even gets these lines that come down from the edges of your nose. What are those called? Nasolabial folds? Anyway, Kai Ikarashi and Ichigo Kano each get a lot of attention in these videos for their highly recognizable and stylized motion, but while Yoneda's work is less immediately recognizable, I also appreciate his penchant for realism, which works really well for gross moments like this. Like I mentioned earlier, he also seems to be the go-to tentacle guy so far. He also chooses to place the camera at a slightly low angle, a little below Laios' eye level, so the slight wide-angle distortion in his face means that his eyes end up pointing in slightly different directions, making him look really deranged. They finally find their way back to the stairs that they came in from, and the animators really love this smarmy-faced pumpkin because, once again, they've added it to this shot as if reacting to Marcel in the frog suit. And who could blame them? He's beautiful. And of course, Laios is the only person who'd be this excited to eat a brick. This lot are clearly from Fantasy Japan. Japan! So Maizuru summons this Ushi-Oni, or ox demon, from fantasy Japanese folklore, and it does kind of look like this could be a hallucination at first glance because of this really interesting way that it's illustrated. These thick, soft, slightly blue lines and the texture over the whole thing, and the limited color palette make it look reminiscent of traditional illustrations like this one from around the turn of the 18th century. It's even animated a little differently, with more of a stylized paper doll look. In fact, in this later scene, you can see that Maizuru's magic is in some way based on this paper, which she brandishes, ready to use against Laios a second time. In a world where the animators have notably done a lot with depth, this creature intentionally looks shockingly two-dimensional. Also, in contrast to Kabru and his party, Laios and his have ventured further than anyone else so far and defeated the feared Red Dragon, but with little understanding of other humans, are quickly trounced in a PvP scenario. There's a missing Senshi panty shot here, though I guess we've been spoiled over the last few episodes. I just don't totally understand why they choose to remove some of them, even from otherwise identical shots like this, and add in even more elsewhere. Maybe that's just one of those mysteries that only God knows the answer to. Remember that time Laios was talking about how nice it would feel to be eaten by a man-eating plant? Yeah, this boy sure loves to be all wrapped up in a cocoon. I can relate to that. Laios and Kabru finally get to meet for the first time. This is actually the last panel of chapter 35, and therefore volume 5, so it was sort of a cliffhanger, like they're finally face to face. Is this guy just gonna keep fake smiling, or is he gonna suddenly go killing machine mode like he did a couple chapters ago? I guess we'll just have to wait and see. So it's pretty funny for it to be right here in the middle of the episode like this. It's still freaky, and I think it works, but definitely takes on more of a comedic tone to hold on this shot for so long, and then just cut right back to Laios talking to everyone else. Like Kabru just randomly interjected, stood there in awkward silence, and then slunk back into the corner.
We're trying to get to...
I'm the highwayman.
Okay, good to know. Well, so you see...
I'm the highwayman.
Okay, this has nothing to do with the episode, but since we're between chapters, I feel it's my responsibility to mention this tidbit at the end of the volume where Kuro gets bitten by the sea serpent. The show continues to faithfully recreate the manga panels through these dialogue scenes, right down to these 3 panels, which they just pan across in simple cuts by Aoi Abe. Chilchuk is forced to guess whether Laios or Senshi is a bigger risk of getting the weirdo police called on them, and guesses wrong. I love this added close-up shot of Shuro listening to Laios cheerfully explain why he was eating a part of the wall earlier. It harkens back to the uncomfortable realism of that earlier shot of Laios coming through the wall with the detailed shadows that define the shapes of his nose and neck. And contrasted with the straight-on, approachably cartoony style of the reverse shot of Laios, this one highlights the complete disconnect between the two of them, and that Laios completely misunderstands how what he's saying will land with other people. In conjunction with the haunting, echoey score, this scene puts us in Shuro's perspective, where, from the outside looking in, it just seems like Laios has gone mad. Kabru continues to show just how deceitful he can be and commits the ultimate sin, pretending to be interested in Laios' special interest, a transgression that he quickly realizes will have consequences. Meanwhile, Chilchuk need not to have worried because these two are getting along like a house on fire. And the title here just says Eastern food, as if the story itself, being from a fantasy European perspective, doesn't know what any of this is. And finally, the big reveal. Having evolved from the dinosaur-like dragon, Fallen is now some sort of giant bird monster, and that giant smoke signal that Maizuru just created certainly isn't going to conceal their location. This is one of the first moments in the manga where Kui uses a consistent and realistic sense of lighting to create a dark atmosphere to this scene, and a sort of chiaroscuro effect with the sharp contrast between light and dark that defines the shapes of Fallen's face and shirt. And that effect translates fairly well into the anime, though I do think the extreme contrast and texture elevates the horror of this image in a way that these clean animation cells never could. This was another relatively simple episode in terms of animation, but one that pushes the narrative forward into a whole new realm while using the subtle differences in realism to communicate character dynamics. There's increasing emphasis on these statues scattered throughout the dungeon, and multiple warnings now about the elves from the west. A lot of groundwork is being laid for what I think will be a big episode next week, so if you want to catch my next breakdown video, consider subscribing. And for the first time, I'd like to give a very special thank you to my supporters on Patreon who are helping give this endeavor at least some semblance of financial viability.
Scrubbin, Katie L, and Siege Weasel,
as well as the other names that you're seeing on the screen right now. It's been so fun to build this channel with y'all, so if you want to help make it so that I'm able to keep doing this for the foreseeable future, consider becoming a patron. It's linked right here and in the description. Once again, thank you so much to everyone who's joined already, and I hope to see you over there. Otherwise, see you next week.